Indeed.
So, yeah, I mean, there's been an attempt, right, from the uh, Department of Education of New York City to create a centralized curriculum.
Well, New York State has one. The Regencies, don't? Isn't that kind of a centralized curriculum?
It's a guide, right? But it's not like a rigorous, like everybody has to be doing the same thing at the same time
Oh, really?
kind of
Huh.
thing, right? There's variety within it. As
So,
long as it's like the core is like as long as you teach the skills for the to get them to pass the tests, it's pretty much there's flexibility, right? And particularly so in the English language arts. It's a little harder to have a huge range of variety in like social studies where they have very specific things that they want, to test on. And science, the same thing, math and chemistry, biology, whatever, right? But in the English language arts, as long as they pass the writing and comprehension exams, right? There's flexibility in terms of what texts you teach and whatnot, right?
Right.
But they're trying to change that for everybody, and make it tighter in social studies, and it's already pretty tight actually in math and science.
Right.
But particularly in the English language arts, where it's really not necessary, right? I mean, actually, the advantage is to be able to take your student population and be able to use texts that you feel are most amenable, like that demographic would be most receptive to, or whatever.
Well, have you ever seen there's a video it's been around for a while, and it's basically showing that Sinclair Entertainment is this company, or broadcasting, I think, is a company, and they own scores of local channels all over the country. And in their local news, they actually dictate exactly what the story is just being read. It's just all coming off a wire. So the video that's going around just shows that it's all of these anchors saying exactly the same thing, the exact same words with the exact same inflection, and the exact
on
same
message, right? You got to be on message.
You have to be on message, and this is kind of what you're getting at, right? Is that
right?
You really want everyone to be saying almost the same words at the same time, and there's no room for anything that's off book, because that could be dangerous. That could be teaching somebody something that isn't authorized.
Right. Exactly. And so they tried to implement it in the summer school program, and it was a total disaster.
Oh, that's
it was like the best thing that could have happened was their centralized curriculum could be a disaster. I mean, unfortunately, this to the victimization, unfortunately, it's not funny, actually, it's pathetic, because it's, a whole bunch of students during the summer that needed to get these credits to stay sometimes on track, or to graduate even, particularly because of consequences related to being, in remote learning in the spring, right? Then got subjected, like they were guinea pigs, to this system that was a total, nightmare. They have like 20% attendance or something.
Oh boy. And that was an online attendance?
Yeah. The summer school was entirely remote. Exactly. And see, what really needs to happen, is that the centralized departments need to stay out of curriculum and let the experts do it. And what they need to do is they need to be talking to the feds about extra money for personnel and PPE, if they want to do this whole thing like safe and give people a sense of confidence, that their kids are going to be going somewhere, and like really the maximum. Like there's all these platitudes, like we're doing the best we can, and everybody's safety is at topmost of concern, but it's like follow the money, right? That's going to take extra money, and nobody's willing to put that money up. The states don't have it, right? Because they spent all their extra money on emergency management situations, getting ventilators and PPE and all this other stuff, right? Federal government didn't bail the states out for that. And now that they have no extra money for education, they're telling education departments to cut, right?
Well, one of the things that really concerns me, and there's parts of online education which I think are, definitely excellent. But one thing that concerns me about what you're talking about is this idea that a central authority, if everything is centralized and it's all happening, say, online, which is how it could be most efficiently expedited, executed, is that, there could be a central authority monitoring the
Oh,
education,
totally. Oh,
monitoring what's going
they
on.
say that that system, right, that the DOE used over the summer, say specifically, right, because I went to a training for it, right, and then I bailed. I was like, this is going to be a disaster, right? I saw like 15 minutes of a training, and I was like, this is going to be a disaster. And now, like 7 weeks into it, everybody that's part of it is like, this is a disaster. Like, I'm so glad I didn't jump into that because I'm conscientious. I would have tried to make it work, you know what I mean? And I would have been like killing myself trying to make it work, and because it wasn't designed to work.
Well, of course. No, and I think you said you dodged a bullet on that
Yeah,
one.
totally, totally. But anyway, so they tell you though, as part of this thing, right, that central, like at any given time, right, centralized people, they tell you you won't even necessarily know it, right, but they will be spot checking on people dropping in, checking out how things are going, right, and that you need to just be aware of that and conduct yourselves accordingly. That like at any given moment, somebody else,
Big
from the
brother.
central board or whatever,
Right.
could be popping in.
Well, and the weirdest thing about it all, I mean, kids get that school is a minimum security institution, and parents want that. They want their kids to be somewhere safe during the day so they can go to work and do whatever. And you obviously can't have kids running around everywhere. So schools play a dual role, it's educating them and also kind of keeping an eye on them.
Right.
So that's understood. But there is a lot, thank you so much. There is a lot of humanity in schools, used to be. There were exceptions there. A good principal can do so much. Good teachers can do so much. And it's really about the exceptions. How do you teach someone versus what is being taught?
Right.
And words are just words, but how do you convey, knowledge to someone? And I think that's a very individual thing. Everyone is kind of individual. And what concerns me is that you're going to have a generation of kids that expect to be monitored in a very emotionless, cold, and centralized way.
Mm.
And I think it's a really terrible danger. And I worry about the liberties of the United States really being eroded during this time. And what direction things are going in.
Well, and it's like, and it's the fact that the incidence of this crisis becomes an opportunity to further tighten. You know what I mean? It's like when you're in
Right?
handcuffs, right? And
Yeah.
you jiggle and they get tighter, right?
Yes. Chinese finger puzzle.
You're jiggling because they're tight and you want, but because they get tighter, right? And so, like psychologically, emotionally, experientially, as a culture, we're jiggling, and yet the restrictions are getting tighter and tighter. Most definitely.
And I hope, a lot of me feels that a lot of this the politics that are taking place right now with many different things, I feel, is more political than, say, scientific in many ways, and socially scientific. A lot of the things going on. And I really hope it all calms down after the election. And I really don't care who wins as long as it stops. And we go back to a normal, relatively normal state of American style liberty and free market, and free market education too, and free thinking. My concern is that it's gonna, as you say, this Chinese finger trap is gonna get tighter and tighter and tighter, and that it doesn't matter who wins. After the election, someone's going to say, "Hey, this stuff's kind of cool. Let's make it even tighter."
Mm.
And I think that just can't happen.
Well,
It just can't be allowed to happen.
yeah. I mean, my hope is that that's the fork in the road we're at, and that the one. I think in one case it could get tighter, and in another case, it could it could ease up a little bit. Um,
Kind of like after World War II, and in a sense, many of the things going on now are in part with World War II in a number of ways,
oh,
different
totally.
in ways, but similar in some key ways, and worse in some key ways, remarkably. And after World War II, there was this explosion of art and science and culture and freedom, and people just, some places cracked down after World War II. The communist side
Right.
was really
Right.
kind of tightened up, But the American Empire sort of side really kind of exploded with this perceived freedom anyway, perceived freedom. Obviously, there was a lot of security going on at the time on both sides. But this perceived freedom really created where we are now, with this fantastic internet and fantastically huge companies and this amazing technology and the best universities, in the world. But that's all starting to erode. If you look at the indices of freedom, there's a couple of them. There's press freedom and economic freedom and so on and so forth, and just democracy in general. Every year, the U.S., is sinking down in
Right.
terms of real freedom. And I believe that Americans are the frog being boiled in cold water. We're not realizing what's happening. And sure enough, the Chinese are there. They're not, it's not happening as quick as some would have you think, but there's significant things that have happened already. And the Chinese are really biting at our heels, in terms of really taking over things in
Well, I
the
mean,
way.
it's so packed. Everything you said is just so packed. Because on the one hand, I totally agree that there's a burgeoning of opportunity post World War II, right? But then there was kind of a taking advantage of that opportunity that I think you're also gets us to where we are today. In
Right?
terms of heightened, forms of nationalism in other countries, like France, for
And in this
example.
country.
France, for example, right, and then reciprocally. But like France's, a requirement that a certain amount of their, theatrical releases, just percentage-wise, is just always minimum number are French, right?
Right. And France is not
No,
a
right.
super
That's
big
why
country.
that's why I like to
It's
use
below the US.
right? But that's a pushback, right? Because it wasn't
Yeah,
always like that in France either, right?
right.
But then France saw this like tsunami, if you will, of American culture, the McDonald's, the Starbucks, all this, right? And then there's been kind of a, which I think American corporations took advantage of. I mean, in part for economic advantage, obviously, but I mean also in part, some of these large corporations were also part of the military-industrial complex, right? And at least fostered a military, a U.S.-backed military agenda, specifically like Del Monte, for example, in South
Right.
America, right? Um, and so there's pushback from that, and arguably that's another one of the consequences, right? We have all the good things, right? The space, technology. I mean, some countries are just getting capsules into space now, and we're
Right.
50, 60 years ahead of
And,
them.
and, we, and we feel threatened by that.
But now we haven't continued that progress, right?
Right.
We
Because
started to stare
we're
back at our
dying
belly
to find.
button, right? And somewhere along the line, I mean, but it's relatively recent, because I was reading, talk about parallels about the New Deal, for example, and how the New Deal was this program, to come out of this disaster of the Great Depression, right? And following, a checklist of um, crises, really, that are not unfamiliar to us now. And that New Deal was proposed by a Democrat, but then subsequently, continued, by Republicans up through Reagan, continuing, programs that,
Yeah.
initiated in the New Deal. It wasn't like they came in and they just completely undid everything that the previous administration did, right?
Right.
They tried to make it better and say, okay, well then this is how we improved upon that, right?
Right.
But
Because it's essentially infrastructure.
we've kind of devolved into like, we're not going to do anything they do. We're just going to do our thing,
So polarized.
and it's really destructive, So that's what I'm hoping that we can get beyond. I don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, historically, politics in the U.S. has been very polarized. In the old days, and I mean the very old days, it was extremely polarized. I mean, if you read some of the things, even up to Lincoln, people just were slinging the most heinous shit at each other all the time and using language which is despicable,
Mm.
in reference to each other. And, and then you look at the English, House of Commons, and
Yeah,
it's
right.
like it's like a row. It's like they're having, some sort of bar fight
To this
all the
day,
time.
yeah.
But yet, and they accomplish things? I'm not 100% sure what gets
Mm.
accomplished. And then, it's becoming it's all kind of pocketed in the U.S. You know, no one's fighting, but they hate each other. You know, in England, I do believe they pat each other on the back and go to the pub afterwards.
Right.
You
Like it's
know, in the
theater,
U.S.,
form of theater, right?
oh, yes, a form of theater. And here, you know, they really despise each other, I think. I
Well,
mean,
did
it's
you
not,
see the recent thing that was the recent sort of intra-congressional sort of conflict between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez?
I don't know if I've heard the latest.
Uh, so she's just apparently walking along the steps of, one of the buildings, right? And a Republican, Yoho, I think is his name, Republican,
I know who you mean. Yeah.
Republican senator sees her and like verbally accosts her, and waves his finger at her, and is saying that she's crazy woman and a danger to American society. And we only happen to know this. It's not because she said anything, right? Um, a reporter happened to be nearby and caught it,
Right.
and then reported on it. And then he denied doing any of it. And then that's when she was like, look, I wasn't going to say anything, but,
Right.
he's denying what truth was reported. And I'm here to tell you that truth was directed at me, and that's what happened, right? So then she went on her way, right? And then she was going up the steps apparently, and he was coming down, right? And then he continued down the steps, and at the bottom of the steps there was a sort of a gaggle of reporters, right? And with other senators doing interviews, whatever. And in the context of that, right, not to her face, but in the context of the aftermath of this confrontation with her, where he's wagging his finger in her face and all of this, he said to the reporters that she was a fucking bitch.
Yeah, and that's not fair. And she's a very polarizing figure. I mean, there's no
Sure.
doubt. And and she represents something very interesting in what's going on now.
She's a communist.
She has different ideas than she's a communist.
She wants to be. She wants us to be
Yeah.
socialist.
She's a socialist Democrat. It's not exactly communism.
Yeah. But what's
Damn
interesting
close.
is a lot of people are using as their platform, they're referring to Marxism, a lot of the groups right now, which is interesting, I think.
But I mean, in any case, she shouldn't be called a fucking bitch in any case.
No, not in the
No,
political arena,
no.
because
Right.
she's representing a different idea.
Right.
And that's an important part of what goes on. Now, you might not like it, and you might think it's wrong, and you might call her a communist, or you might call her, socialist Democrat with a capital S, and you can say all kinds of things and have opinions about it, but without the respect that is due, I think, people in politics, you can never achieve anything. Because once you lose the respect, that's when you lose
exactly,
the
and
ability
that's
to
exactly right. Well, it's the cancel culture thing, right?
Right.
So like if
But
you
she
don't
hasn't-
agree, if you don't agree with me 100%, and Tammy's been the victim of this herself, right? If you don't agree with me 100%, then you're off my radar entirely, right?
Right. And that's just not realistic, and it's childish in a way.
Right.
And I think it is, and I think that's happened in the past, and I think it comes and goes, but it's definitely here right now. And, there needs to be this ability to reach across the aisle and, for example, get an infrastructure bill done. And, there's the Green New Deal, has New Deal in it, and it has green in it. And sometimes that could seem really good, and some parts of that are great, and some parts of it are not great. But at least she's doing something, right?
I think the attention to the environment is an awesome engine to drive economic development.
Yes, it can be, I think.
Because we definitely need something, right? I mean, there aren't too many more people left in the world that think that we continue with the lifestyle that we have, pollution, plastic, carbon, all of that, and have a sustainable, environment, right? Have a sustainable bio niche for
I think everyone
for
can
Homo
agree that
sapiens.
Yeah, and everyone can agree that pollution is bad. I mean, I don't think anyone can look someone with a straight face and say, "Oh, pollution is good." Even if it maybe is economically advantageous at some point, it's still not good. There's nothing good about pollution. And it's interesting about carbon. I really feel carbon is largely a red herring, except the real threat is methane, I think.
Right.
And the weird thing is that, carbon, if it's carbon, the thing is that there's definitely climate change, and it's very likely to go frozen than it is to go hot. And the problem is climate change. And I think absolutely intelligent reverence and respect for climate change needs to be part of all economic and educational, considerations, I think. But I think we're really facing something, whatever the cause, and it might be, and I hope it's not too late. I don't think these things are too late.
It's
But
not about too late, it's the cycle it runs.
but one of the things that's happening right now is that the whatever the heat structure is, and it's just a few degrees, is starting to massively release methane from.
Right.
It's been happening in the
Right.
Arctic for a while,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
now it's happening
The
also in Antarctic.
Right.
Sorry.
No.
And that's something that really has to be, because that's the runaway train.
Yeah.
Is the methane.
Yeah.
So whatever that is, and they're introducing these bacteria and things but it takes decades to get the bacterial colonies mature enough to be able to eat all the methane.
Right.
And 10 years is a long time for spewing methane into the atmosphere.
1 second. Just text me when you get there, okay? Okay. Thank you.
I shall.
Thank you. You're already there.
Oh, I am. Yeah. Where am I? God.
We're here. We're here. We're in this space.
But I think infrastructure is the key thing. And all these things fall, even education.
This is another place where the Smurf shot himself in the foot, right? Because he ran on infrastructure and he didn't do jack shit about infrastructure.
No, such a lost opportunity again.
Unbelievable.
Another 4 years of the greatest opportunity. He could, let's say that with his persona, he was someone who could, let's say he's a terrible bully the darn infrastructure bill through.
Right. Right.
But make it a good one. Put your foot down and say, I hate pork. Let's drain the swamp. Do the whole thing and say, let's have a high quality infrastructure bill. That's a real one.
Right.
He could have done it, I believe.
Yeah. They were
one reason
waiting for him to just do it. Yeah, they would have approved anything.
They would have forgiven everything else. He would have got his face on a coin.
Yeah, there would have been no impeachment. There wouldn't have been, I mean, I don't like Trump, but also there has been just one after another. And there's no excuse for him not having done his job. But by the same token, it's not like he's had nothing to deal with.
No.
But there's nobody that's ever been as corrupt. I mean,
excuse me, have you read history? Not true.
Start with emoluments. Just start with emoluments, right?
Yeah. No one seems to care about emoluments.
No other. What was the last president that didn't abide by the emoluments clause?
Well, it is unprecedented.
I mean, he has a hotel.
Last president turned us over as slaves to the house.
Right? Rusty's getting hysteria. I thought you weren't part of this conversation.
Sorry,
I'm kidding.
The point that Tammy's making is that
we welcome all off-screen voices.
Yes, and the point that Tammy's making is that, the emollient thing is definitely obvious, but it's the unobvious things that other presidents have done from both sides of the aisle that have been much.
Admittedly, but that's the game, right? Is like at least like pretend.
It's not even trying.
Dishonest.
It's not even trying.
Pretend that you care about the protocols, right? And if you're smart enough and clever enough and have enough influence and friends, well, that is the game, right? I mean, that's, nobody doesn't expect that.
And in no way am I suggesting that it's justified. But I think what he's doing is saying, look, I have a bunch of hotels, and this is how I make my living, and it's not a big deal. And the thing is that nobody thinks it's a big deal. It's the weird thing. I was sure that it's the emollient thing that was going to get him actually convicted.
I know. And
because it's absolutely obvious. And there's just no defense. And it's clear, there's proof and everything, but nobody gives a flying fuck, including the House, the Democratic House.
Well, because they're all guilty of the same thing.
Probably.
They're just not advertising it.
Exactly. So that's an endemic problem that probably is never going to go away. Even if they hide it, emollients in the letter of the law, he's breaking 100 million times over. The spirit of the law, presidents enrich themselves greatly while in office.
Well, I mean,
they can.
They don't actually. They don't make that
Well,
much money.
after no, but after they're in office,
And after
they set up.
and why not? I mean, they're experts.
And they should. I don't have a
No
problem
problem
with
with
that
that.
specifically. You know, one of the weirdest things that did occur, and I
To
voted.
not drive policy is the problem, and that's where he tipped the scales, right?
Right.
Is that for him, it literally drives policy in ways that are so transparent that he is choosing his own personal profit over, right, the benefit or the concern of the country. So if you want to do one, be a businessman, but that's not what it means to be, a president of the United States.
Yeah. In my opinion, he simply shouldn't have the opportunity not to put everything into a blind trust as president. I just think that's not a bad idea. Now,
Yeah.
some people would disagree, but I think that there shouldn't be an option for it. It should just be something that is mandated. Like he
Right,
can't choose
right.
not to have
Well,
secret
see,
service.
but I mean, you go back to the old boys network thing, right? That it's like this gentlemanly agreement, that like, when you're going to fight a duel, right? Everybody takes 10 steps. One person doesn't decide to take 9, right? Because then
Right.
that's not,
cheating.
that's where you have the seconds, right? Because then if they would get shot, right? But everything that's been like that, where it's not been specified, and even when it has in black and white in language, he's violated it.
It's true, very obviously.
You know,
It's funny, it's like I love the opening, the prelude, the prologue to, or the prelude to Breakfast of Champions. And if you know what I'm talking about, is he Kurt Vonnegut? He does it's a quick little thing that goes all over the place. But one of the things he says is that it wasn't when the American Indians, South America and in North America, were pretty much wiped out by the Spanish. It wasn't it wasn't their weapons, and it wasn't their ships, and it wasn't their horses, and it wasn't their intelligence, and it wasn't even disease that wiped them out. It was the audacity of the Europeans. And this is something that the Indians and they weren't, angels either, but the audacious nature of the Europeans was something that they just were blindsided by.
right?
And so this is one of Trump's strengths, I guess you would say, is that he's incredibly audacious. What's interesting to me, though, and so I try, I'm really trying to find something good. There are a few things I think you can say, but what I really dislike, what's happening right now, is that whatever side of the fence you're on with the corona thing, whether you think everyone should wear masks forever, or you think it's all fake and no one should ever wear masks, and what the hell are we doing anyway? There's absolutely no leadership from Trump, like none. The CDC is under his practically direct control. I mean, it's a part of the Health and Human Services, which is one of the cabinets.
So that's the HHS.
Yes, and so Health and Human Services, and he should be able to control that, in the sense that he's the executive leader of the executive branch, and it's under his domain to control. Yet there's virtually no control. There's no organized position. He could have said, "Look, this is a serious thing. We all must wear masks. Let's just make the thing as flat as possible. Let's come together as a country and let's do it. And maybe we'll all survive, because this is the worst thing ever." Or he could have said, "This is nonsense. It's nothing. Just drop it. It's a bad flu. Let's just burn it out. We'll get herd immunity. It's going to suck. Don't go to the hospital if you have a cough. Just let's burn it out, and let's just not shut down the world economy." He could have said that too, but he didn't really do any of those things. He just kind of let it, and I don't mean just talk about it. I mean, lead, take control, and lead.
He could have said some stuff, but it was still up to the governors.
Yeah,
and the governors went against it. He said every time he said it's not that big of a deal, they went, "Shut everything down."
True, the governors did run with it, but that's not really, it doesn't matter. The buck does stop with him, even if he doesn't want that. And it's up to him.
It's not about what he wants, it's the law.
The office of the president, the real power of the office of the president is to make deals, is to lead and make deals, and to be charismatically effective.
Yeah, persuasive.
And so as a president, and to use the powers of the population and the popular,
to Sentiment.
phenomena,
Yeah.
and to
Okay.
say, hey, I don't these governors are thinking that this thing is this way, and I think it's this way, and if that's what he thinks, then it's his job to sell everyone on it. And whatever he's thinking, whatever is right or wrong, and who knows, in this case. And but he's not doing that. And to me, that's a total abject failure of what's going on. And if you have a list of things that he's done, and some people will argue that they're good things, and some people will say there's nothing good he's done, but it doesn't matter. He's not really he's not taking control of the country in a way that he can and possibly should have. And I don't mean through martial law, obviously. That's the wrong type of control.
That is what he's trying.
Yeah, that is what he's trying to do a little bit. And some can argue maybe he should, in response to things. And it's not like it hasn't happened in the past, but I don't think it's the right thing at this time. It's past the right time.
What he needs to do is, have you heard about what's happening in South Texas? Apparently, the towns in South Texas have been really hit by this because they don't have big hospitals,
right?
And like nobody's paying attention to them, And if there were national leadership, he would have his finger on where the hotspots were and be able to say, okay, National Guard or Army Reserve. We need a mobile hospital here, right? And then, okay, New York is fine now. Close that up. Take it here, right? And just literally fight it like a war, right? With the FEMA resources that we have. We have the resources to be able to do it, but because he never took responsibility for, addressing it as a national problem.
Certainly a phenomenon.
It's certainly become a problem, whether it was real or fictional. We're in the midst of a huge problem with over 30 million people unemployed. Some people say as high as 50, and all those stimulus checks running out. Foreclosures are expected to go like 20 million. They're expecting 20 million foreclosures.
And businesses just down and out. So many different, all these little small companies are just out of business in the media, in finance, across the board.
Restaurants,
of course, just out. So many small businesses.
The governors are doing that across the country.
And Tammy's point is that the governors are responsible directly for that. Because the governors, even if Trump did say, hey, let's shut everything down, the governors could say, not in my state, we're gonna keep the businesses open. We're not going to shut down because of a flu. They could have taken that response, or it could have been any number of mixtures of those things, but they didn't. They really destroyed the economy. And I have a chart which is kind of, what I did is I took the current numbers, and I could show it to you really quickly if you want to see it.
Hey, is that the one you showed me some time ago about the percent?
Is that the blue one with the lines?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I won't show it to you again. But the idea is that even now today with the extended number, the number of deaths is, it's a terrible season. It's really bad. But it's basically the same as a typical year in the 70s, which is, definitely not progress. It's regress. This is a terrible, terrible year for some mixture of flu and cold and corona and God knows what else.
I think it's definitely, with 140,000 deaths now, that's not a typical flu season. That's definitely...
It was in the 70s.
That was that's...
But it's not...
Do you want to wear the same clothes from the 70s?
And and by the way, the flu season ends in April.
Right.
So we have added a bunch more months onto that, and people need to realize that. This is wholly and completely unusual. And if you look back at medical history, they're absolutely trying to make it as horrible as they can, and it absolutely is not representative of the way we normally do things.
It's become very politicized, I think. And there's so much...
clearly something in the bacterial, virological world has happened. Clearly, right?
And we had a fever for a couple of days. There's these videos you can see online.
No, just generally, right? So there's definitely something there, right? And so then the human reaction, and I'm talking worldwide, right? Because it didn't start here, you know what I mean?
No.
But the human reaction to that is almost like a test of like that form of intelligence versus our form of intelligence, you know, and
Well,
then and here they're kind of that the virus thing is kind of winning, right?
yeah,
So
the virus
New
is.
New York in the tri-state area kind of followed the European model, right? Of
Which
like
is weird.
severe shutdown, complete and total lockdown, almost militaristic, right? Shutdown, right? Fines and all the rest, right?
Right.
But now they had a second quarter growth that was one of their best second quarter growths, economic growth in the history of the EU, and they've got the disease, again, whether fictional or to what extent fictional or whatever, right? Whatever standards we're using, right? That we are using the same standards for every country, more or less, right? Uh, China, Russia might not be fully reporting, right? Again, totally understandable given the circumstances. North Korea, whatever. But certainly Europe and the United States have common interests in terms of like intellectual history, right? The development of the history of ideas, right?
Trump has really derailed a lot of that.
Well, he's derailed a lot of it, but the scientists are still at least having been educated in that tradition, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my point being that there's some common sort of foundation work that you could say that would make a valid comparison of the United States and Europe. And yet, right, the United States in comparison to Europe kind of fails, right? The United States is looking more like right now India and Brazil.
If you believe any of our numbers, and you
Well,
should.
if you believe any of them, right? But I mean, and that's my point.
Because
Whatever number, whatever you think about the numbers, they're all trying to prove whatever it is the same. One would think, right?
well, they're being used for both sides, I think. But the thing that I see that people aren't doing is using a death rate number. And that's the thing that is like when I say it's as bad as the flu in the 70s, it's using the rate. You people will say, oh well, look, Belgium has only so many, but we have so many more. But Belgium's death rate is much higher than the U.S. But people literally, with a straight face, are seeing, well, Belgium has fewer deaths than the U.S., so that Belgium is better. Belgium is better than the U.S. at fighting COVID. With a straight face, they're saying that without taking into account the rate of that the U.S. is a much larger country with a much larger population. I mean, it's kind of silly, but people are really running with this. I see it all the time. And it's very difficult. And I think my feeling is, and I really hope that it all goes away after the election, because I firmly believe that whether it's totally conscious or unconscious or just going with the flow, that somehow this whole thing is attached to a anyone but Trump phenomenon.
And I increasingly believe that to a certain extent, right? Again, I think that there are certain objective things that are happening. I think that the spin on the interpretation of those things that are happening has been politicized for sure.
Absolutely.
Right? But I definitely feel that certain things, are definitely happening. The statistic that captures my fancy more though is the hospitalization rate and hospitalization capacity, right? Because the death is kind of like the bottom line thing, always, no doubt, right? But the panic is being incited by the hospitalization rate, right? And when
I would say it's the other way around.
When
The
there are
panic
too many
is
people,
creating the hospitalization rate.
say again, the panic. Well,
I think it is largely.
If the hospitalization rate were at a critical point only in blue states, then I would tend to believe that. But I don't think there's a motive, for example, in red states to exaggerate that data like that.
Well, it's interesting.
The political motive, right? The political motive definitely diminishes, right?
Right. I mean, we've known several people who have rushed to the hospital because they get a cough. And in the normal flu season, you just wouldn't have done it. And luckily, the hospital's turning them away.
Well, right, but that's what right. And so, but the thing is, right? And even given that, there's still places in red states where the hospitalization rate is exceeding capacity.
Yes,
Right.
I think that's true because like universally, people are freaked out, you know? And I just don't believe that it should have shut down the world economy. And I just don't think that it's that severe. You know,
Well, see, I
it's,
think in a way, maybe you're right, this is sort of now getting to hone in on the pet theory, that really is underlying this for me, right? But I kind of think that we got information about the fact that this was happening abroad, right?